Jumping into today, if you've been with us through the month of August, we took a time aside and spent some time in the Proverbs and just gleaned so much wisdom out of them. And normally in September, when the school year kicks off, when we start coming back together, we love to take like 2 weeks and just go through a vision series. And that's just to remind us, to refocus us on the vision of why we exist as a church, why churches exist. And as I was praying through this series, like over the last month plus, I was like, God, just give me like the wise words to say. Let me get everybody just so excited about Northlake. Let there be like such a clear vision of like, this is where we're going and we're going to take that hill. And it's like a war movie and everyone's like, yeah. And then, and as I like kept planning, I was like, man, all I just come back to is like just the essentials of what we already know, what we're called to do, and just reminding us of that. And it reminded me of something. It reminded me of when I was in high school, and about this time of year was my favorite time of year because we would start our Friday night high school football games. Any high school sports fans? Football, baseball, volleyball, soccer, cheerleading, chess squad, mathletes. Okay, I know who you are. But here's what I remember most. So I played football all 4 years. I played both sides of the balls. Yes, I did play on varsity. I know that's surprising. I went to a 1A school, so the size of Mount Baker Meridian's 1A. And we were a small Christian school, and our football program had started like 3 years before I became a freshman. And so we were so good at being so bad, okay? And again, I was an offensive lineman, if that gives you any bearings of how good we were. And here's what I remember most. I remember every game. The game would start, and you'd always go on the field, and both teams, whatever sport, whatever you're doing, you're always going in there, you're like, I am awesome. We are going to annihilate this other team. It's going to be amazing. And I'm going to come out during halftime, and the coach is going to be like, you guys figured it all out? You're awesome. Just keep being awesome. We're going to be like, thanks, coach. You're the best coach ever. And he's like, you're the best kids ever. It never worked out that way, right? It was like we got completely obliterated. Everybody's forgetting plays. People are jumping off sides. It just looks like a train wreck. But in football, in high school, pee-wee, college, the pros, every time at halftime, the whole team goes in the locker room. And every halftime, the coach gets up and gives a speech. And I realized something. Every time the coach gave a speech, he never shared anything new. It was never like a revolutionary play that we didn't know about. It was never a new concept in football that nobody knew about. But somehow, he would tell us the same thing we already knew. He would remind us what we already knew. But after I got done listening to that coach, I felt like $1 million and I was ready to go out there again and totally get dominated by the other team, okay? And I realized that's really the goal of a vision series. My goal here is not to share anything new with you. You're like, wow, I never knew that's what church was about. Oh my gosh, Jesus died, he rose again? I never knew that, right? But here's my hope. My hope is that all of us leave here today united together with a clear mission. And that we look at each other, and regardless of how the first half was, or for some of you, you're a bit older, the first 7/8 of the game were, right? That we're going to go back out there together, marching forward for the goodness of the gospel, for living in glory of our Father, and that we would realize that we're not alone. When I think about having focus or being centered as a church, I think about our church at Northlake and about where we started. And the origins of our church are pretty special. We weren't always Northlake with this really cool logo. We used to be Geneva Community Church, really creative name because they were in the Geneva neighborhood, right? We could have been Northern Heights Community Church, but we decided to be cool and just take the whole north of the lake, right? Which is pretty awesome. Anyway, so Geneva starting is all centered around the Firs. And for those of you who don't know, the Firs was set up as a conference and retreat center for missionaries and to encourage disciples of Jesus to hear what the Lord was doing all throughout the world. And so they would bring missionaries in and gather churches together. And after those conferences left, there was still a remnant of staff that would stay there year-round to take care of the facilities, to literally build up this infrastructure, and it is what the Firs is today. But here's what I think is so cool, is back when it first started, there was just a handful of disciples of Jesus using their giftings for the glory of the kingdom. And those disciples decided, how can I bring the truth about who Jesus is, this most important thing in my whole life, to this community around us? And so the roots of Geneva Community Church, which is now Northlake, are really individuals stepping out in boldness to make the gospel known. Back in 1915, we read that a prominent Geneva woman, her name was Carrie Cole, she saw that there were so many students who didn't know the fundamentals of following Jesus. So in the Geneva neighborhood, she started her home on Coronado Street for the children, and started a Sunday school. And she just brought the kids in and started teaching them the fundamentals about who Jesus was, and it exploded. Amen. Then after that, as they're getting more connected with non-believers and believers in the neighborhood, a bunch of moms were saying that they wish there was a kindergarten. And so later on, a woman by the name of Margaret Toms said, I'm going to start a kindergarten for the Geneva neighborhood. And that went gangbusters. It exploded as well. And it was bringing kids in, teaching them school, but centering it all around the truth of the gospel. And they built that on their own. Sandboxes, teeter-totters, preschool curriculum, and Bible stories, and others kept drawing on it. But as they brought kids in, they saw that there was a bunch of men and women who just didn't know who Jesus was. And then more women just said, you know what we're going to do? Let's start a Bible study. And so literally in our history, you can go on our website, click the About tab, and go to the bottom. You can read the whole story. It's pretty amazing. But literally in there, it says, so they started a ladies' small group, and there were 2 believers and then a bunch of smoking society folk. I'll let you figure out what that means, right? But here's the cool part. Is all these women started to come to know the truth about who Jesus is, putting their trust in Jesus and becoming disciples. And as the women did, the husbands are like, what in the castle is going on? And then men started to form their own group, and they became disciples. Amen. For over 50 years, literally 50 years. This is how our church started, was simply disciples of Jesus, fully living out their devotion to the Lord, saying, how do I make him known in my life? And then after everyone looked at each other like, there's so much cool stuff going on. They're like, why don't we start a church? Why don't we have a Sunday gathering to bring these people who are new to the gospel to come and learn the foundations of what it means to follow Jesus? So on Palm Sunday, 1962, Geneva Community Church had its first service. You know what's interesting about this? They didn't advertise in the paper. They didn't put a notice out. We got the best teachers ever. We got the best kids program. Oh my goodness, we got a new building. It's amazing. No, they didn't want discontent people from the community coming to their church. They wanted their church to stay open and available to people who were new in their faith through the ministry going on in the neighborhood. And I look back on that vision, and I'm just so inspired. This church was not planted because some huge organization with a bunch of money said, where is there a vicinity of our denominational church that's not quite there? It really was just people living out their devotion to Jesus to say, let's gather together to encourage each other, to fight the good fight, to keep on going strong. And I realized something. That is what we are called to do. We gather here not as an end-all, be-all. What we're going to look at today is our end-all, be-all is discipleship to Jesus, to go live it out in our families, in our daily lives, in our communities. And we come here to celebrate and to gather and to say, how cool is God that he's working in each of our lives. Amen. To start off, though, we hear about this amazing church, and I'll talk more about how it became Northlake next week. But a question comes, should we still keep meeting as a church? I don't know if you guys have heard, church attendance is on the decline. A lot of people, especially young people, feel like church is a waste of time. You notice something, when you join a church, all of a sudden you get hit with a lot of red tape. There's a lot of sacred cows. There's a lot of people with strong opinions. And it seems like sometimes the hardest place for a new revival and ministry to take place is within the walls of a church. That's not me saying that, that's what a lot of you, and I know others have said. Others feel that church is a bit formal, a bit old, and for non-believers, it's weird. I mean, imagine coming in here and you have a group of people singing, which is normally like for a concert, but they're not singing for Evan or Nina or Eli or the people on stage, right? They're singing up to the Lord and crying out, holy, 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 and you're like, holy, what is going on, right? It's a little weird. And then a guy gets up and opens the Bible and encourages all of us to follow this one true path. They're like, it kind of sounds like a cult. And you're like, well, we follow Jesus. It's one man. He's in charge. Okay, yeah, you know what I mean? But it gets weird. And the average attendance in church right now is under 1.5 times per month. Attendance is on the decline. People feel like they don't need church. There was a huge movement years ago, but it's still active. People who say, I love Jesus. I'm a disciple of Jesus, but I do not need the church. So the question comes, what is the big deal with church? What's the big deal? And I hope we leave here today with a reminder of the huge purpose of what the church is and the fact that we are the church. And to start off, it has nothing to do with a building. It has nothing to do with a bunch of people coming together or a 501(c) or an IRS certification of being a church. Church isn't the beginning. Jesus is. Amen. So when it comes with what's the big idea about church, it starts with living for the gospel. We are all called to live for the gospel. And I use that word intentionally because I heard something when I was a youth pastor that scared me to death. It said that 80% of students that come out of a church background, that come out of youth ministry, 80% of them, when asked, what is the gospel, cannot give a clear answer. When I heard that, I said, that is embarrassing, because the gospel is the gospel truth, the good news about who Jesus is. And I don't want a single person who calls Northlake home to go a week or a day without hearing the truth of the gospel. For those of you who don't know, anytime you're here on a Sunday, you'll always hear me preach the gospel. I almost always preach it, right? That God created us intentionally, human beings, for a relationship with him. But that when we sin, when we do what is outside of what God says glorifies him, it not only hurts him, but breaks off our relationship. And the story of the Bible is God's radical love for human beings, even though they continually deny him. And the most beautiful thing is when he sent his son Jesus to live a perfect life that anyone who puts their trust in him does not have to be separated from God, but can live in a beautiful, perfect relationship with him for eternity. And the best part, it's not based on anything we did. It's entirely based on his love and his son, Jesus. That is the gospel. God created us. Our sin separates us. God's love sent Jesus to redeem us. Preach it to yourselves. Look yourself in the mirror every morning and say it out loud. Do you know why? Because when it's on your mind and it's in your heart, it can't help but come out in conversation. And when someone talks about Jesus, since it's already on your lips and your tongue, you can't help but say it. Romans 5:8 puts it so beautifully and simply. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And here's the thing. The gospel is not just like a pass for entry. It's not like, yep, I made that decision a while ago. A lot of times people treat the gospel kind of like a loyalty card at a grocery store, right? They're like, yeah, I put in my number, now I put it in every time, I'm cool, I'm good to go. You're like, no, that's not it, right? This is full devotion for the rest of your life, that you were bought for a price, that we were slaves to sin and the terrible life the world provides, and we were made new to come and be slaves to Christ. That's the language that the scripture uses. Why? Because in every way we submit to him in everything. It is not on our own power, it's only by the Spirit we do this. Jesus declares, all who want to be my disciple, Luke 9:23, after his disciples just said, you're the Messiah, aren't you? You're the one who was promised to come. He's like, you're right, you guys are so smart, but realize something. Anyone who wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. Amen. Church doesn't start with church. Church is a community of people who center themselves on living for the gospel truth that Jesus is the only way for a true, abundant life. And why live for the gospel? Why does that have to be the key? Why should we even do that? And the answer comes from John 10:10. We are living for the gospel because we are all about receiving the abundant life we desire. John 10:10 is such a beautiful verse, but it's also one that should shake us or scare us straight. It says, for the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. But I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I don't know anybody in this world who, when asked, do you feel like you live an abundant life? That you are living in your giftings, that you have joy, that you have peace, that you have self-control and all the fruits of the Spirit. Do you have that? And most of the time, if we're honest, we go, I taste it sometimes, I have it a little bit, but I don't. And then the second question, do you want that? And every person who ever lived says yes. And then we go and try to find it in the world. And Satan is really, really crafty to steal, kill, and destroy, and not even make us realize we're doing it. The huge rates of depression, anxiety, people who look like zombies just going through their day, scrolling on a phone, shutting the garage, turning on the TV, not talking to anybody, not even their spouse or their children. And then days go by and turn into weeks and turn into months. And what do we set our sights on? A new car, a bigger house, another vacation, a 401k. And yet, like a carrot on a string, it never quite fills up. It never satisfies. Proverbs talks about how a fool is like a dog who returns to his vomit. And we know the world doesn't provide it, yet we go to it time and time again. And we have this desire in our heart to live an abundant life. That when you show up to a church service and you hear somebody talk about it, you're like, yes! But why don't I have it? It starts with, in all ways, denying ourselves, daily, dying, taking up our cross, and following Jesus. So the question comes, once we do that, once we are fully and totally living for the gospel, once we say, yes, I want this vibrant life, the question is, we love Jesus, we got that unlocked, now what? And the second thing, for what's the big deal about church? The first is living for the gospel, but the second is this, is the Bible calls us to make disciples. I would call this living on mission. Amen. Right after Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus goes, dies on the cross, comes back from the dead saying, I proved it once and for all. Nobody else can be the Messiah. I am the fulfillment of all these prophecies to come. And then he says this to his followers, Matthew 28:18. Then Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Amen. What's the big deal about church? We're really serious about the gospel and accepting the abundant life of Jesus, but we're extremely serious about what we're called to do now that we have put our trust in him. Jesus says to all of his followers, go and make disciples. That's not a we thing. Why do you go to church? Oh, because we're called to make disciples. No, you're called to make disciples. You. And you. And you. You too. All of us. But unfortunately, we don't take that mission seriously. We like to live in a world where, well, that's somebody else's gifting, or that's not my thing, or I'm really good at this. But here's the thing. If you have put your trust in Jesus, then he says to you, your calling is to go and make disciples, to make my name known. Because if you have found something that you love and you cherish and you can't help but talk about, aren't you going to want everybody around you to taste and see what is so good, the abundant life you have? And if you don't feel the excitement to tell somebody about the abundant life of Jesus, it's probably because you're not living out of the abundant life that he offers. And he invites you to taste and see how good he is and let that well up and overflow into everybody you know. There are far too many people that go to church that aren't disciples of Jesus. I was thinking about this for something that I got into, and a friend of mine who's part of our church who said, once you start talking about your new hobby on Sunday mornings in your sermons, then you know you're really addicted, and that is the terrible game called golf. Any golfers in here? Anybody tried golf before? Yeah. Golf is awful. Don't start. It costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of counseling for how angry you get, and if you want to see somebody who can hit a wicked curveball that goes behind him in golf, come golfing with me. But my friend Chris invited me, and I went out and I said, I'm going to be terrible. I'm going to make you laugh the whole time, and I'll probably never do it again. And at the end of it, I said, how about we go again? That was pretty fun. But here's what I find. Now it's like I look to talk to people about golf. I like see people, I'm like, hey, what do you like to do for fun? And they're like, oh, I do this. I'm like, you ever try golfing? It's like an insider's club. And people are like, yeah, you golf? I'm like, yeah. I'll see somebody with a polo shirt on. I'm like, you're wearing a polo shirt, you golf? They're like, no, why are you asking that? Because when you love something, you desire to be connected with other people. And here's the other thing. I desire to tell people about golf. I'm like, you should really give it a try again. It's a lot of fun. It is. It's terrible, but it's fun, right? Now just imagine that one day, I'm talking to somebody, and I'm like, yeah, I've been really into golf recently. And they go, oh, you like golf? I'm like, oh, yeah, I love it. They're like, I love golf. You do? We should go golfing sometimes. Do you go golfing? They're like, do I go golfing? I'm at the course every week. I'm a member at Lake Patton. When I hear someone's a member, it's like a high membership fee. So you're like, oh my gosh, like you get like priority tea times, like all the inside trails. It's like, whoa. So imagine I see this person. I'm like, that's awesome. When can we go next? They're like, how about Sunday at 10:30? I'm like, I got nothing going on. And so I show up. Okay, I'm in my full golf garb. I've got my clubs. I'm all ready to go. I show up. We get in the golf cart. I see my friend. They're all totally like dressed to the nines. I'm like, dude, this is going to be so fun. We go to the first tee box. He lets me go first. I put my ball in. I take out my driver. I go back, the worst form you've ever seen, and I just hit that ball, and it just goes way off. And I'm like, ooh, whew, told you it was going to be fun, and I walk away. And then imagine I look back, and he's just sitting in the cart. And I go, you're up. I'm done. I don't need to hit another one. I'll hit like 30. They'll all go the same way. And he goes, oh, no, let's go. But you're going to, oh, no. I just drive the cart. I'd be like, but you said you're a golfer. They're like, oh, I love golf. Yeah, I'm a member. I'm here every week. I'm like, yeah, I know. Aren't you going to? No, that's not really my strong suit. I'm really good at driving the cart. I would be like, you pay a membership fee. Oh yeah, absolutely. I've been a member for 30 years. 30 years? Have you ever golfed? Oh, absolutely. Dude, there was one time, 25 years ago when I first started, I played such a fun round. It was awesome. Why didn't you do it again? It's kind of hard to find your ball sometime. Well, yeah, but I think that's the point, right? And yeah, those greens are really fast. It's kind of a challenge. And honestly, driving a cart, it's much more comfortable. But I love golf. Would you go golfing with that person again? Whoever said yes, I'm watching you. Would you be genuinely concerned about their mental health? Yeah. How many people claim, I love Jesus. I'm in church every Sunday. But are not serious about the mission and the calling of what it means to be a disciple? That's my new favorite question that I've established for like the last year, is when people talk to me about their kids or their parents, and it's somebody who I know is a disciple of Jesus, I ask him, are your parents disciples of Jesus? Normally what we'd like to ask is, do your parents go to church? Or, do your kids? Or, does your friend? Or does your neighbor? And it's funny, when you ask, do you go to church? Oh, yeah, every now and then. But it's funny, when you ask people, are they a disciple of Jesus? The responses are, disciple, that sounds a little intense. Yeah, I don't know if I could say they were a disciple of Jesus. We like to confuse the two. What is church about? It's about living for the gospel, to taste the abundant life of Jesus. The second most important thing is church is all about living on mission. Why? Because we crave and long to see people's lives changed in Jesus. Like a hobby that we pick up, that we find hope in. We want to tell other people so that they can taste and see, and we're not afraid to bug them a little bit about it. Why is it that I'm not afraid to bug my neighbor who I talk about every time he sees me go golf, and I'm like, you gotta get out there sometime. He's like, yeah, you've told me 100 times. And yet we're afraid to lovingly tell somebody, you really need Jesus. I heard the funny story. My dad's like, yeah, I've been praying for our neighbor Bill, because he really needs Jesus. And he got this new barber, and he went and got his hair cut, and the barber called him afterwards like, hey man, I just gotta let you know, you need Jesus. I'm like, that's awesome. That he had this desire of like, I love this guy. And he goes, and Bill kind of like, it's like, well, my neighbors, they go to church and stuff. And he goes, and I go, does he still go back to the barber? I'm thinking, no way, right? This barber called him and was like, you need Jesus. He's like, yeah, he goes back every week. He loves the guy. I'm like, yeah, isn't that funny? Because when people have a passion for something, when they're living on mission, that others can find the joy they find, it's not that they repel us. It's that there's beauty that they take serious their calling. You and I are called to make disciples, and we must take that calling seriously. Why? Because we should long to see people come to know Jesus. And do you know the beautiful part about a church like this? Like, look how many people are in this room. Imagine if we diligently prayed and sought that each of us would see two people come to know Jesus in 1 year. In a room like this, we would have somebody come to know Jesus once a day. And we would be celebrating and rejoicing. We'd have baptisms galore, and we would have this encouragement and the fire and flame that would be just so stoked in us that, yes, we can do this. And I may not see that fruit in my neighbor this week or next week or in 51 weeks, but on week 52, that's my turn to let the Spirit work through me for the glory of God, not for my glory, but for His, to see the truth I find. Jesus is the one true way to have a relationship with God. What's the big deal about church? Because we're called to live for the gospel, and we're called to live on mission and see people come to know Jesus. But where's the building come? What about the building? We have such a nice building. What about the church services? Notice when we talk about church, we don't talk about buildings and church services, because that's not the church. Church is people who are doing those two things: living for the gospel, living on mission, and then the third things we see, believers connected in community. We crave being with people who know what we want and they want it too. We crave accountability, encouragement, and doing things with other people, because when we work together, we are better. Check this out. Research studies display that publicly committing your goals to someone gives you a 65% chance of completing them. Just saying it out loud. However, having a specific accountability partner increases that success rate to 95%. This is what it comes like January when you have a New Year's resolution, or you want to read more books or be healthier, walk more. When you have an accountability partner, that goes up to 95% success rate. Why? Because there's something psychologically that takes place when we commit and journey down a difficult challenge or road with other people. When we are together, we are better. We grow best in community, in unity around the gospel. And that's why the church, believers who are laser focused on living for the gospel and making disciples, that was Jesus' plan A to make the gospel known in the world. John 17, my prayer is not for them alone. That's his disciples, the 12 he is with. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father. He's praying out to God, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. His prayer is that we would be unified around the truth of who Jesus is and the desperate need of the world around us for it, and that we would come together and stay on mission. And he goes on. I have given them the glory you gave me, the truth about who you are, that they may be one as we are one, I and them and you and me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Why? Because then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. As believers, as Christ followers, though we are distinct and different, and though we get really annoyed at each other, and at times we just want to give up on this thing called unity and community, we are to be one in purpose and love and action, undertaken with and for one another in joint submission to Christ. Why? Because when we come together, that is when we shine the brightest light to have a far greater impact on our community, on the world around us for the gospel. Makes me think about the movie Rocky. You guys remember Rocky back in the day? One of my favorite parts, Rocky falls in love. Do you remember the girl he loves? What's her name? No, you got to say it the right way. Adrian, right? Adrian. And in this movie, Rocky's this boxer, and he's got his buddy Paulie. This is Adrian's brother. And Paulie goes, hey, Rocky, what do you see in my sister? Why do you like my sister so much? Rocky's like, it's the gaps. He's like, gaps? What do you mean gaps? He's like, well, I got gaps, and Adrian's got gaps, but to get us, no gaps? And I think about how simple-minded that is, and yet how beautiful it is. That we all have sin and shortcomings and things that we're terrible at. We have gaps. And when we come together with other believers It's like 100 people with a bunch of different gaps. When it comes together, it forms this complete picture of unity and the beauty of what heaven is going to be like, and that God calls us to not be at each other's throats and to hate each other, but to love each other and forgive each other as he's forgiven us. Why? Because when we love each other well, a group this size, a church our size, the world can't help but go, how in the world do you do that? Because no human beings can do that together. That would take a miracle from God himself. And we say, amen. Do you know atheist researchers are talking about, hey, one day, how are we going to travel across the galaxy to see if there's other life forms? And the smartest people of our time have said, human beings are so fickle and narrow-minded and individually focused that no matter how smart we become, our individual intelligence, when brought together, will lead the world to be destroyed before we can go find other life forms. Literally, that's what they're saying. We're so stubborn and lack unity that no matter how smart we get, we can never achieve greatness because we'll kill ourselves before we do. And you know what Jesus said? Yeah, that's why when they come together in unity around me, the one true life-giving source, that the world can't help but look in and say, that's something I've never seen anywhere else. That must be from God. Being connected in a community because we are better together. And can I tell you something? We can't encourage, care, know, see the gaps in each other and fill them in without actually spending time together. Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews was worried about this when he saw the early church. He saw that the church neglected spending time together, that they would get caught up in their individual lives. So he wrote this, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, the truth of the gospel and the mission to make disciples. For he who promised is faithful, and let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up on meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another all the more as we see the day approaching. We cannot encourage people we don't actually know. And I'm sorry, but just showing up on a Sunday morning for an hour and a half and knowing the people behind you or to the side of you or in front of you, first names, that's not knowing each other. That's an hour and a half on one day. That's like less than 10% of your day. And over a week, that's less than 1%. There's more commitment in a middle school soccer team than Christians being in community with each other. And if we really want to care for each other, if we really want the unity, if we really want the encouragement that we crave to live the abundant life, but we get distracted, we all do, we need each other. Do you know what that means? Someone's got to step up and say, I care too much about you not to let you keep living life alone. And for you to go, I care too much about me too, and I've been lazy, and I need you. Do you know how many people I hear say, I'm sick and tired of being the ringleader? I have a great group of friends who love Jesus, and I'm the only one who gets them together. So many people have told me that. And so many people go, well, I would be part of community if someone just invited me. Why don't you invite them? Do you know what community takes? Boiling it down. Inside the church, but outside of the church too. I made this because of inside of the church, because for obvious reasons. But it takes this, right? First, you need structured time together. The way you build community is you have to set aside time together. You make time for what's important. And for you who say, I don't have any time at all, how is it that you can carve out 3 hours a week for The Bachelor, and yet you can't carve out an hour a week for community? We need structured time together, and I know it's hard, okay? But the second thing you need is you need organic time together. We need time outside of structured times where we just rub shoulders with each other and do things together, right? This happens via location. You go to the same school together, same workplace, or live in the same neighborhood. Other times it comes from life stage. Maybe you're single and don't have kids, or you just had kids, or you finally got rid of your kids out of your house after 28 horrible years, right? Whatever it may be. But it's through different life stages, or the last is shared interests, hobbies, or following sports, whatever it may be. But what we have to do is when we have those shared things, we need to seek to spend organic time together. The greatest example of how community looks beautiful is from your closest friends in high school. Do you remember your closest friends in high school? Were they the most smart, intellectual, enjoyable people to be around? No, it was the annoying kid next door who just kept coming over, right? And you're like, why won't you go away? And then they become this is my best friend. And it's like, and then he just becomes my best friend. Because I see his weakness and I see his differences and he's so different to me. But when we spend structured time, which we did at school, and then organic time, we can't help but care about each other, encourage one another, spur each other on. But in order to do that, you have to take the time. And it's not just about being next to each other. Because I know people who go to church and attend Sundays every week, and they go to a small group, and they're like, yes, I have community, but it goes one step deeper. You can't just spend quantity time, you have to spend quality time. It means showing up, sharing, caring, and loving each other even in sin. It means admitting your sin and allowing somebody to look at you in your sin and say, I still love you, and to do the same thing back. And of course, it means growing together. What's the goal of this? That we grow together in Christ and in the Word of God and grow up in every way. Paul writes about this for the church. He says that we're no longer like infants being thrown to and fro by the waves of this world, but instead we grow in steadfastness up together. Why? Because that's Jesus' plan for the world to come and know him. Amen. Here's the biggest thing. If we're called to love the people of this world and care for them deeply, to make disciples for the glory of God, we can't expect to be very good at loving the world if we can't even love each other. We have to be willing to spend the time and energy even when it's hard. And I'm the spokesperson for having a hard time doing community together. Mainly, not because I don't love people, because I'm as extroverted as they come, and you don't have to be, but mainly because it just takes so much stinking time. And we get so self-centered. I work 8 hours a day, and then I just want to go and relax, and I just want my time. But the one thing that we hold closest to us is the thing leading to us not feeling satisfied. And by giving up a little bit of time for that structured community, for that organic time together, to share and to care, that's when we fully start to taste and see the abundant life Jesus offers. What it really boils down to is making our heart and life's devotion to love God and truly love others. Amen. Jesus' words, Matthew 22:34. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, that he was really a good teacher, the Pharisees got together, and one of them, an expert in the law, tested him, trying to trick him, and said, Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and prophets hang on these two commandments. Jesus is awesome. He makes it so simple. What we have to do, the Christian life, is one of growing in affection and growing continually in our love of God and the truth of his word and how good he is, and in loving and caring for one another. The problem comes when we overvalue one of those things or don't value either of them. There are way too many churches that overvalue loving others. And they have mottos that are a little sketchy, right? They're like, we're all about the gospel, but we're all about people. We'll do everything short of sin and maybe a little bit of sin sprinkled in there just for people to come to know Jesus. And we go, hey, you're living life on a mission of making disciples, but you missed the first step, right? Of living out of the truth of the gospel, of the goodness of God's word. But there are other churches that are just as dangerous. They are so set on studying God's word. They're so set on theology and doctrine and getting everything buttoned up perfect that they simply don't have the time to love people. How many more sermon series does a single church have to do in 5 years on Revelation before they realize maybe the issue isn't understanding? Maybe the issue is they're focusing so much on loving God that they're missing Jesus' call to go and love others. It's only once we grow in loving God and loving others together that we fully live this life that Jesus has for us, this abundant life. He boiled it down and made it simple because we are simple-minded and we need clarity. So our commitment, our daily practice that we have to do is be a people who so love God and so love others that those continually converge and the gospel comes out. And that's exactly how our church started. People being so committed in the truth of the gospel and so committed to making disciples and so committed to loving their community that they start Bible studies in kindergartens and nurseries and the gospel coming out. And it was only there that they're doing these two things that they came together. And that's what we have to go back to. And here's the thing. You got to practice what you preach, and you got to practice before game time. And so my invitation is, as we just seek clarity, is to bring us back to the core fundamental truths of what we already know. But like a coach in a locker room, I'm going, we got this. And no matter how much you've messed up before, if you feel like you have fallen flat on your face, we serve a God who loves you and forgives you and is not mad at you, but is just his arms open wide waiting for you to run back and go, I lost my first love. I need to go back to the truth of living for the gospel, and I want that abundant life because I don't feel it. I want to live on mission and see people's lives change for Jesus because I know it's changed mine, and I realize that I have to be connected in community because I know I am better when I am together with other believers. Why? All so we can glorify our God in heaven and celebrate how good he is. To sum it up, it's our mission statement as a church. We exist to lead people to follow Jesus and fully live the life God has for him through loving God and loving others. All right, let me pray and ask God to help us to live that out. God, I thank you for foundational truths, for building blocks, for going back to the simple truth of the gospel. I pray that we would not leave here as like, yeah, I already knew that, but we would leave here with a renewed sense of passion and excitement for how good you are and how important your calling is to make disciples. That's for me. That's for you. That's for each of us. God, I pray that you would empower us. And I pray that today, this week, this month, we would take the active steps to be in community with each other. God, we need your help and your spirit to guide us and direct us to do that. So go before us, Lord. Move in us. We love you. In Christ's name, amen. All right, so here's the thing, okay? You might not like this, but it's how it goes sometimes. This is really only half of my vision series, okay? This is just the setup. And if you realize something, everything I just talked about is what all believers are called to do around the whole world, whether in Afghanistan or China or even Canada, right? Next week, I'm going to talk about once we believe that, once we fully are living that out, then we have to ask ourselves, in God's moral will, we talked about last week, what does he have for Northlake? How do we best live for the gospel, live on mission in community here in Northern Heights, in Bellingham in the year 2023? And next week, I want to talk about what that looks like tangibly for us, how we get involved. And my hope is you leave encouraged and motivated and better united as a church. So God bless you, church. We'll see you back here next Sunday.